Was Russia behind the JFK assassination? John F. Kennedy was the 35th President of the United States of America. He started his term in 1961 and served right up until his death on November 22, 1963. Although his time in office was short, he dealt with some of the most pressing issues in recent American history. Leading America during the height of the Cold War and dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis are some of Kennedy's most notable moments. Sadly, he never got to finish his presidency term though, because Kennedy was fatally shot as he was traveling with his wife and the Texas governor in a presidential motorcade by a sniper. That sniper was former U.S. Marine Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald had fatally shot and killed John F. Kennedy, and then roughly 45 minutes later shot and killed the Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit before finally being arrested in a nearby movie theater. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't last too much longer after that though, because only 2 days later he was fatally shot by a man named Jack Ruby in the basement of the Dallas police headquarters. This death was actually shown on live television as well, so everyone saw it happen. Jack Ruby, the man who killed Oswald, was a nightclub owner who had ties to the mafia. He was part of the Yiddish connection and had moved to Dallas in 1947 with some other mobsters to manage some illegal business there. So I hope it's becoming clear why there's so much controversy and conspiracy theories behind JFK's death. We have a president who was leading America during the Cold War and having to make some extremely hard decisions that were unpopular with large groups. Then we had a sniper who was a former Marine shoot said president, and then 2 days later get shot himself by someone who has close ties with the mafia and criminal activity. For these reasons, JFK's death has become one of the most widely disputed incidents in the last 100 years. Exactly what happened, who was responsible, and why he was killed are all things the public has debated. One of the leading conspiracy theories, and the reason we're making this video in the first place, is that the Russians were ultimately behind his death. Whether that is even possible, how they would have done that, and how likely that is are all things that we're going to look at in this video. So, without further ado, it's time to see if Russia was truly behind the JFK assassination. So first things first, let's all get clear on who killed JFK. The FBI, the United States Secret Service, and the House Select Committee on Assassinations, after a very long investigation, confirmed that it was Lee Harvey Oswald and that he acted solely by himself. This isn't fully accepted by the public though, because there's the whole grassy knoll theory. Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository where he worked. However, in a similar area is a grassy knoll. This could have been a spot where a second shooter may have been. This theory came about from the famous Mary Moorman photograph of the president's assassination, where you can see a small figure on that grassy knoll. People have theorized that this second figure may have been another shooter associated to the murder. Now, if there was a second shooter, then there's an infinite amount of possibilities to who they could potentially be tied with and their motives for doing so. Because of that, and us having no knowledge of who this second shooter would have been, and also because it isn't even confirmed, we're gonna operate for the rest of this video as if Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole shooter behind the attacks. I wanted to bring up this theory to make you guys aware of it, but from here on out, we're gonna stick with the prevailing theory that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole killer. Now, if the Russians were behind the JFK attacks, then they would have had to influence Lee Harvey Oswald into doing so. But why would Lee Harvey Oswald, an American-born former U.S. Marine, want to side with the Russians and kill the American president? Well, apparently, Lee Harvey Oswald felt strong ties to Russia. When he was just 19 years old, Oswald took a trip by himself to Russia. He'd saved up his money and learned Russian so that he could go there and become a Russian citizen living in the Soviet Union. He arrived in Moscow on the 16th of October and had a visa until the 21st of October. He made it clear to Russian officials that he wanted to become a citizen of the Soviet Union, but his request was refused. Rather than accept this though and go back to America, Oswald actually caused a self-inflicted injury that would delay his departure. Many Russian officials met with Oswald whilst he was in the hospital from his injury, and he made it clear to them that he had previously worked in the Marine Corps and may know something of special interest to the Russians in regards to the American military. This was enough convincing for the Russians to keep him around and let him work in a factory, but they were always supervising and watching over him very closely. In 1961, roughly 2 years after Oswald had been in Russia, it said that he started having second thoughts. In his diary, he had written, "I am starting to reconsider my desire about staying. The work is drab, the money I get has has nowhere to be spent, no nightclubs or bowling alleys, no places of recreation except the trade union dances. I have had enough. Before he went back to America though, he met Marina Prusakova and they married shortly afterwards. She came back with him to America in 1962. So after hearing that, it's clear that Oswald had some ties to Russia. His wife was Russian, he initially wanted to become a Russian citizen and tell them about any American secrets that he may have known, and even though he wrote in his diary that he was reconsidering his decision of moving there, that could have easily been doctored as a way of getting investigators off of this train of thought. Now, everything I've covered so far has been old news, stuff that we already knew, but very recently the United States government has released some classified documents that shed some more light on this whole situation. 1,500 new documents were released very recently, and some of them indicated how Oswald had been visiting the Cuban and Soviet embassies months prior to the assassination. He apparently professed his love for communism in these meetings and even spoke to a KGB officer. Is it possible that these meetings to the embassies only months prior to the assassination were actually to make sure that the assassination was going to happen? Well, that's what some people have theorized. Now, just because Lee Harvey Oswald could have been convinced by the Russians to do something like this and lived in that country for quite a while doesn't automatically mean that the Russians are behind this. Would the Russians have even wanted to do this in the first place? Well, short answer is probably yes. It's reported that the leader of Russia at the time, Nikita Khrushchev, hated JFK. Like I said earlier, they were also literally in a Cold War at this time, and taking out the leader of your opposition is a pretty great way to pull ahead. Also, if you were gonna take out said leader, then you would need to make sure that when it happens, you have no damning evidence linking you to the crime. This is why Lee Harvey Oswald would have been the perfect person to use as your puppet to get the job done. So we have a motive from the Russians and we have a motive from Oswald, but do we have any actual proof that confirms the Russians were behind this attack? Well, no. It all lines up and it all makes sense, but there isn't anything that actually definitively proves that they got Lee Harvey Oswald to commit this crime. This is one of the most investigated assassinations in all of history, and the prevailing wisdom is that Lee Harvey Oswald acted by himself. If that's the case though, then why did Jack Ruby kill him only 2 days after he was in custody? It would make a lot of sense that if Oswald was put up to this by some group, that Jack Ruby was sent to then go kill Oswald so that Oswald couldn't talk. And again, that narrative does make a lot of sense, but there isn't any substantial proof that Jack Ruby killed Oswald to cover anything up. Similar to Oswald himself, it's been said that Ruby acted alone on his own accord. This is why this whole story has gotten so many conspiracy theories around it, because when I put it that way, and with all the stuff we know about Oswald, with the fact that Ruby was connected to the mafia, it just feels way too easy, for lack of a better term, that these two men just acted by themselves and weren't influenced by some outside factor. The truth behind the JFK assassination may never truly be known. The prevailing wisdom is that both of these men acted on their own accord and for their own reasons. That Lee Harvey Oswald was simply a disturbed man who took JFK from the world far too soon. Could there have been meetings with the Russians where this was talked about? Sure. Could Oswald have been convinced by the Russians that this was the best thing for Russia? Potentially. But do we have any evidence confirming either of those two things? No. And until we get definitive proof confirming these theories, I think we just need to ride with the explanation given to us that Oswald acted alone. But please let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you think that these new documents released are enough proof to pin the Russians to the crime? Or do you think that some other group was behind it? Or did Oswald truly just decide to do this by himself? Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Nicholas Playlog, and I'll catch you next time.